Alright, I'm gonna blue skidoo right into this. Jey Uso, was he a good world champion or a bad world champion? I know a lot of people have been having this discourse ever since his run ended last week against Gunther in shocking fashion. Not shocking that Gunther won, but no one really saw that as the likely outcome. They were thinking Goldberg was going to interfere or Seth was going to cash in for the Heist of the Century 2.0, and then you have Roman Reigns return, and then the briefcase is wasted to some people yet again. Personally, that's what my theory was leaning towards. But at 51 days, main event Jey Uso's run as world champion has ended. And to me, he was a good world champion. And the reason why I say that is he was connected to so many different points on the show because he was world champion. And do I think he should have lost it to Gunther, who's going to defend against Goldberg at Saturday nights in the main event? Personally, don't think Gunther versus Goldberg needs to be for the world championship, but that's the direction they're going. Nothing I can do about it. I will say Gunther versus Goldberg at Saturday night's main event, probably the best place you could put that match with Goldberg's limited ability, especially at this stage of the game. His matches usually don't go past a certain length, usually around the 5 minute area, because again, he can't really do much, but he also wasn't really taught that much either, so there's only so much you could do for it. And with Saturday night's main event structure, you have the commercial breaks, and a lot of people had complaints about the commercial breaks that are disrupting of the flow of the show, which I do agree with, but that's what happens in prime time. You're going to get loads and loads of commercials, and you have to time it out a certain way. And he has the best opponent he could possibly be in, so I think Goldberg Gunther Saturday night's main event is probably the best place you could do it. Didn't need to be for the world title. No. Is the match necessary itself? No. But they're doing it. It is what it is. But going back to Jey Uso. When Jey won the Rumble, a lot of people were critical of the decision. And I actually did a pod on this a while ago. You could check the archives for that. And a lot of people were up in arms because they looked at Jey. They were like, oh, he wasn't the right kind of winner. He was too limited in his in ring ability. His match wasn't going to be the main event either way. So it was a waste of a Rumble, people were saying. And I vehemently disagreed with that because with Jey, you see a guy who got organically over. You see a guy, even with limited in ring ability, the crowd is still with him, the crowd's still behind him. And why not take a chance on somebody who hasn't received or been given that chance yet? Like a lot of people point to matches, like his match with Roman at SummerSlam 2023, I believe, the tribal combat rules. They point to the match with Jimmy, and they're saying, oh, Jay's a terrible worker just because of these two matches. And they are high profile matches, and again, the matches weren't the best either. I didn't like the WrestleMania 40 match against Jimmy. Wasn't really much of a fan of the one against Roman either in Tribal Combat, but that's not going to negate any of his past performances prior to winning the Rumble. Like I stated, like his series with Braun Breaker was very good. His match with Seth Rollins previously for the World Championship was really good. And I would argue that his run as world champion, he had the best run of matches consistently that he's ever had. Uh, Thought the first defense against Seth was great. I thought the match with Braun was very good. Logan Paul, it was what it was. Again, when you have 10 minutes to make a world championship match mean something against one guy who people are kind of on the fence about being world champion, and the other guy is Logan Paul, you're going to have a very decisive fan base about that. And putting that all under 10 minutes, which is essentially a build for a tag team match at Money in the Bank, it wasn't going to get out of the gate really like that much. It was just going to be an advertisement for people watching Saturday Night's main event. Hey, watch Money in the Bank. And that's what Saturday Night's main event always was. It's always, hey, look what we're doing on our show. Come watch us over there. We're going to do some more stuff. And that's what the Saturday Night's main events are. Yes, they are to blow off programs like Drew McIntyre, like the Drew McIntyre Damian Priest thing, and to have some featured matches that you won't see usually on television. And with Jey, the build with Gunther going to the road to WrestleMania, a lot of people were disappointed in the first half, myself included. It felt like it wasn't going past first gear. You had the Alpha Academy, you had A-Town Down Under involved, and it just kind of seemed like they were waiting for something. And this match with Jey and Gunther, it was the first match announced. So I believe they had 10 weeks of build to fill up, and that's a lot of weeks. And Jey, who transitioned from Raw, from SmackDown, out of the Bloodline story, his character development hasn't been three-dimensional in comparison to that. Like when he was a character on SmackDown and he was doing the whole Bloodline saga with Roman Reigns, you could see levels of character, and he was probably the most developed character in WWE at that point, where people were buying Jey Uso in a main event program with Roman Reigns, to the point where people thought that Jey Uso should have been the one to end the Roman Reigns championship run. Obviously, that didn't happen, but now you have a person who got over organically, like Jey Uso. The YEET chants, I know a lot of people are not really a fan of that, but it got over, so it's kind of like grin and bear it. We're going to see a lot more merchandise moved, and that's exactly why Jey Uso is being given this opportunity at the main event, is because, one, he's very consistent in his merchandise selling. He's very consistent on his presence on Monday Night Raw, and I believe he had, I think, the most matches the year before he won the world title, or at least close to there. So he was a secret workhorse that a lot of people kind of overlooked. So he definitely had the markings of a world champion despite his limited moveset. And I'm sure when that WWE Unreal docuseries comes out with the planning of WrestleMania, with the planning of the matches, and you could even see on the whiteboard itself, Jey Uso wasn't on like the blueprint, so to speak, for the WrestleMania 41 build. If you go back and or if you Google WW Unreal whiteboard, you could see the penciled in kind of matches that they were kind of trying to see if that would be the direction they would go. And Jey Uso is not on that whiteboard. In fact, it was Gunther versus Seth versus Punk, or just Gunther versus Seth, Gunther versus Punk. So there's a lot of different ideas that were thrown around before they settled on Jey Uso. I'm very curious to see how they come to that conclusion and what version of the truth they give us in this docuseries of the reasoning why they decided to go with Jey Uso, other than the reasonings that I mentioned, which are he's very popular, fans are connected with him, and sells a lot of merchandise. And that's what WWE wants. That's what WWE wants, is their bottom line, is somebody who's popular, can put on a good show, and then sell a bunch of merchandise. And putting on a good show, a lot of people think it's just the in-ring portion. However, the entrance is just as much as part of the show, and that's why Jey Uso's entrance has caught fire like it did. And you don't have the crowd organically chanting one more time the night after he wins the Rumble and think that's manufactured. Jey Uso has a connection with a lot of people because I don't think a lot of longtime fans that were part of my era who's been watching for a long time realize that a lot of these newer fans have brought back interest into WWE's popularity. These newer fans jumped on board during the Bloodline story. They jumped on during the whole rise of Jey Uso's character and how he was with his programs with Roman, Sammy, Jimmy, and he's just an easy guy to root for from that standpoint, where you're watching this television show, you see Jey Uso, and he's finally getting this opportunity, and people are emotionally connected with him. I know people, especially now since he lost Money in the Bank, but LA Knight is an example of people, it's like, oh, he's organically over, why isn't he in a higher position? And I do understand that. I do think LA Knight should be in a higher position because man's supremely talented and, solid in-ring worker, in my opinion. I've always enjoyed watching his work, even though it's not the most flashy stuff. It reminds me very much of John Cena from 06, 07, where it's like, okay, you could recognize his matches, but again, it's not really going to be anything like too crazy in terms. You're not going to see a 450 from LA Knight anytime soon. But with Jey Uso, like there could be a lot of comparisons towards him and a rising John Cena from 2005, 2006, what have you, where, not the most diverse moveset, but you could see that he's trying to expand on it a little bit more. You could see him do the Hurricane Ranas, the chokes, and we're gonna get to him using the choke. And I feel like Jey, with his positioning, and he even said in an interview that his back is kind of tweaked up a little bit, and he's more towards the end of the career than he is the beginning. So it's good that he got this world title run in, and it's good for WWE to take a chance because they're at a position where they can afford to take chances on other guys. It doesn't need to be just Roman Reigns, Seth Rollins, Cody Rhodes, uh, just all these other like main event guys who are stamped in that positioning. You can afford to have a Jey Uso and LA Knight break through and be consistent main eventers. And that's the one thing that I don't think Triple H gets credit for, is making people who are quote unquote mid-carders popular acts. When before, in the previous regime, it seemed like if you weren't Cena, if you weren't Roman, if you weren't Seth to a degree, if you weren't Randy to a degree, Punk when he was there, the other guys, they didn't have a good chance of mobility unless it was the Money in the Bank briefcase, and then you cash in, you get a championship run that wasn't very great, and then you're back to where you started. And it feels like, at least now, and I'm recording this the Raw after Jey qualified to the semifinals for King of the Ring, and he's going to be facing Cody. Like, it kind of just seems like now it's business as usual. Like, the continuity between why Gunther gets a rematch and Jey Uso has to go through King of the Ring is kind of lost on me. Like, I guess you could use the reasoning that Gunther was a long champion or a long reign champion, so he can get a rematch whenever he wants. But with Jey, it just kind of seems like, all right, he's still kind of selling the rib injury, and now he's going to face Cody, his friend, in the semifinals, and it should be a fun match. I'll enjoy it because the Cody and Jey story is secretly like one of my favorites that's been happening in WWE. Majority because of the press conference they did, but also I felt like their chemistry when Cody used his political chips, whatever that means, to bring Jey over to Raw is a cool story to tell, where it's like Cody was the first guy to accept Jey because he knew that Jey made the fans happy and just wanted to bring him over the Raw to give him another chance. And that chance did pay off. And if you were going to get to this match, I would have liked to have a stronger build with it because, they're just coming off of a tag team title, not tag team title, a tag win at Money in the Bank. But their friendship has been well developed in the lexicon of WWE mythos. So I'm not exactly against them having, I think this is their first time match on Raw, where is the place that Cody brought Jey over. And it should be very interesting because how the semifinals are working out. And it's not like a traditional like King of the Ring where you have like one obvious final. Like there are a couple different ways this can go because you have Sammy in the semis with Randy. And of course, Randy has history with Cody. Cody has history with Randy. Cody has history with Sammy. Vice versa. Sammy has history with Jey. So there's a bunch of combinations you can feasibly see with this King of the Ring setup. I know people, like at least a select number of fans, are disappointed that the King of the Ring wasn't used for a person that's coming up the ranks. Like I think people wanted LA Knight to be in that position from Knight to a King. It just kind of writes itself branding wise. But with LA Knight, he's feuding with Seth Rollins, and he's going to be, I guess, like Seth's like next opponent, which I'm totally fine with. It gives LA Knight a prominent position on the show, whichever shows he's in, and it gets him out of the Bloodline universe and into, I guess, the Vision universe. So it's going to be pretty interesting to see how LA Knight develops from there. But did LA Knight need King of the Ring? Technically, stars don't need anything. As long as you have good writing and good angles and good stories to tell, You don't need something like Money in the Bank or King of the Ring to prop yourself forward. Does it help? Absolutely. But as a story device, it's not a necessity to go to the main event scene. Like, I think Money in the Bank, King of the Ring should be more of a solidifier of like, all right, we're gonna give you an opportunity or give you a chance, or it could be used to further a story like we're seeing right now. There's a lot of moving parts in this current WWE line. Going back to Jey Uso's title reign, he was connected with so many people, from Seth Rollins and his new group, to Sami Zayn, to Logan Paul, to Gunther, to CM Punk, referencing that he's going to face Jey if Jey's still world champion. Jey Uso became the main part of Monday Night Raw by proxy of being world champion. And the amount of roadblocks that you saw him go through makes a good underdog champion. And I think WWE, at least this time, did the underdog champion right. Where it's like you could tell the guy's out of his depth, but he's not going to say, I'm the underdog consistently. It's not like the Rey Mysterio or the CM Punk '08 version where they're just going to keep scrapping and keep fighting for more. It's Jay's like, all right, anytime, any place, anywhere, let's go. You know, it's like, I'm not just happy to be world champion. I'm going to prove that I can be and still be world champion without selling the good name of the world title. And I think Jay's run, even though 51 days, he was very consistent. You know, he had the match with Seth, he had the match with Braun, he had Logan, then he had the tag match, and then he had Gunther. Like, all those performances that he did, I think were exceptional. Like, were they like the top of the top in-ring performances of all time? No, but for Jey Uso, he put in work. And I don't think anyone can take that away from him. He put in work trying to be a world champion that people can be proud of. And I know from the Jey Uso fan side, people are disappointed that his run is short, but sometimes, like, I'd rather have a quality run than a quantity run. Because we've seen runs many, many times where they last, like, almost years, where it's like, did that really need to be that long of a title reign when so little happened? Like, I remember in WWE when the United States Championship was basically the paperweight championship, where people would hold on to it for like 200, like 300 days and do nothing with it. Like, there's nothing I can remember offhand of, like, let's say Dean Ambrose's U.S. Championship reign, or Cesaro's championship run, or Santino's championship run. And they had very lengthy runs, but you don't really remember them because nothing of note really happened. And people would be kind of disappointed. It's like, okay, they're just there to win the championship so they get a little extra, and then probably lose to someone higher on the card than them, like a Randy Orton or a Sheamus. And both of them are not in title contention, but they'll still beat the United States or Intercontinental Champion because that's just what they do. And with Jey, again, the quality of the run, I think, will be looked back on fondly. I know Jay's father, Rikishi, had some things saying fire the writers, but again, I don't think this is the writers' fault, because there's one guy who is in control of, like, how somebody loses a championship and who approves all the writing plans, and that's Paul Levesque, Triple H. So I don't think you should just come for the writers' heads. You should probably, like, if you have a criticism, but he won't do this because, Triple H is the creative consultant officer, and you can't just like just criticize the guy who's running the thing, because then not only that, like, Jay's not going to look good in that light. And plus, it's always funny that Rikishi, like, the quotes of him that go viral are usually about Jay and not about Solo or Jimmy. It's just about Jay. So who am I to judge? Father's love exceeds all. Jay as world champion, I think, kind of proves a little bit of the talking points where people are like, we want new stars on top. We want to see stars be given opportunities or chances. And then they give this guy who hasn't been given a solo opportunity a chance. They're like, no, not like that. We don't want that guy. And then they'll say, it's the what have you done for me lately kind of crowd, where it's like, you're only as good as your last match to a lot of fans' eyes, and people will harp on you and harp on you if you're not evolving your character, or if you do have a bad performance, they're not going to look at you any differently until you redeem themselves in their eyes. And it's just one of those things where I feel like, again, this is not every fan base, like all the fan base, but a select margin of the fan base, where it's like they won't give people the opportunity they say they want to give them the opportunity because it's not the chosen guy in their ideal setting or ideal booking, so to speak. And that's totally fine because there are people who have their favorites, but if you look at it from a business optics where it's like, oh, right, what do you write in the suggestion box? Oh, I want more people to get an opportunity. And then you see people be given more opportunity, but it's not somebody that you necessarily want to be given the opportunity. Then it kind of like flies in the face of what you actually want. And I feel like sometimes WWE will do things that fans aren't a fan of, no pun intended. Uh, but people would still like criticize every little thing. Like everything's a hill to die on when it comes to wrestling, when it comes to how the stories are told, because it's like, oh, why didn't they go this direction? Okay, they're going this direction. I could see how they're going this direction. Would I prefer another direction? Sure, but I could actually see why they're trying to do the thing that they're doing. And it's like a lot of people just kind of armchair book scenarios, and that's perfectly fine. But again, it's kind of like me telling an author or a director of a movie saying, "Oh, I wouldn't make that choice." I wouldn't make that choice. That therefore, it's not good. Like, no, there should be reasons why other than I wouldn't do it that you should argue why, and that's what I feel like, at least within the professional wrestling realm, the discussion portion is not very strong in terms of will people have a civil discourse on different ideas. And I've had talks with people who are fans that I have a different opinion of, or we have a different opinion of, like, what's going on in the professional wrestling landscape. And it's like it's all civil. And I feel like that part is kind of lost with everything. It's always people who are more obsessed with other people's fandoms than they are with watching the product on television. And I would get comments a lot saying it's like, oh, you're not a true wrestling fan. Like, that really means anything, nowadays, where it's like people are more obsessed of discrediting your fandom than anything else to make it seem like, oh, your word means nothing. And this happens in every fandom, I assume. Professional wrestling is just the one that I've spent the longest in, that I've seen where it's like, oh, you can't say, you don't know what you're talking about because you're this kind of fan or anything like that. You're a WWE fan, you're an AEW fan, you're a New Japan fan, you're a AAA fan, you're a CMLL fan. Everything is to discredit people nowadays because now everyone has a podcast, everyone has a show to do. And sometimes I feel like fans kind of lose themselves when it comes to wrestling, because then they forget what makes wrestling good because they're talking about all the bad, and they have the right to be critical about what they don't like that's not a crime. But I feel like there's not enough talking about the good in professional wrestling, because whether it's WWE or AEW and you're focused on the anti WWE or AEW fandom, it's diminishing your like for the actual product that you're enjoying. Because what I see on social media is people in wrestling, oh, they shouldn't have done that, or they didn't go with this idea, or they're doing wrestling wrong. But again, everything's opinionated. I think I've seen Simon Miller from What Culture, and he said something to the effect of where it's like WWE, AEW, they're all in different universes. So why would I judge this match in WWE between this match in AEW and vice versa? And I think that's a pretty profound way of like talking about like the differences between WWE and AEW. Like if I were to watch Lucha Underground as a show, it's differently formatted than any other professional wrestling show there was at the time. So I would look at it a little bit differently than I would in WWE or AEW. And it's just one of those things where people are very like steadfast in what they believe in wrestling, and with the open-mindedness it's not as prevalent, and I think a lot of people are comfortable within their fandom, whether it's WWE or AEW. And same thing with wrestlers too. Like people think WWE, like a WWE World Champion, should be one thing and one thing only. Which brings me back to Jey Uso, where Jey Uso seemingly is one-dimensional, and there were missed opportunities, in my opinion, on interactions with Roman, interactions with Sammy as world champion, because you have Roman's story about being the tribal chief, and now Jay's the world champion. And how does Roman feel about Jey being world champion, despite calling that title the Losers Bracket Championship? You have the Sami Zayn storyline that's currently going with Karrion Kross, and Kross getting his head about not being world champion, and we saw that elongated shot the night after WrestleMania Night 2, where Jey was on Raw and celebrating with Sami Zayn, who returned that night, and Sami was looking up at Jey being world champion. People were like thinking, oh, is he going to attack? So yeah, they definitely did drop the ball in that regard, I think, with the story that's being told there. I think they could tell an effective story just as much with Jey and Sami, even if Jey doesn't have the world championship. If they want to circle back to Roman and Jey, they do have that opportunity. I would say that the championship would have been a better tie for it. But again, it's not my company, not my problem. With Jey, I think that his championship run is going to be looked at a little bit more fondly, and his run overall is going to be looked at a little bit more fondly when we go a couple years down the line, because people are just going to remember the quality of his run and like the reactions he got, and they're saying like all these different things. Oh, he wasn't a good worker. He's a good worker. He wouldn't be in the position he's in if he wasn't a good worker. And people would be like, oh, he's a part of the family, but he got over pretty much on his own after he got traded to Raw, or the political chips got cashed in so he could go to Raw. And he was doing fine then. And the thing is, like, no one was really clamoring for a Jey Uso world title run when he went to Raw the first time. And then slowly but surely he started being that workhorse, building his name, and people clamored for him being a singles champion. He won the Intercontinental Championship. Run was short. World Championship won short. But the overall story was that he was a guy that shouldn't have been in the position he's in, but the fans and the support behind him put him in that position. And I really do think he had his best match with Gunther when he dropped the World Championship, which shows that Jey, I think, is somebody that can be world champion again. He's very similar to Jeff Hardy in that regard, where at the time you had people criticizing Jeff Hardy a little bit for the lack of in-ring ability. And I remember this because I was a fan during this time, where it's like, oh, all he does is a twist of fate. He does like the whisper in the wind and then the swanton. That's it. He doesn't have any technical in-ring skills. Or they would mention his outside life, where it's like that was a detriment to the performer that he was. But with Jey, it's very similar, because the fans go crazy for him. Even though the online reaction and the arena reaction was a total 180 from each other, people were still talking about Jey. And I can say this as somebody who creates content and video content for TikTok and just like Instagram, Spotify, YouTube, whatever. Like Jey Uso, he usually does very well for me personally when it comes to video traction. Like he's probably the most popular person, or at least one of the most popular people for me when I make content on like the WWE shows, or if I'm talking about WWE in general. He's usually up there, like sometimes up to like the six-figure digits, where it's like hundreds of thousands of views, like sometimes with Jey Uso as a talking point. And his storyline actually like got me to break through on TikTok a little bit. So yeah, I have a little sentimental for Jey Uso. Thank you, Jay. But it just kind of goes to show that Jey Uso is a popular person and a popular performer that you can afford to take a risk on, because if he succeeds in the main event or doesn't succeed in the main event, you still took a chance. And I think that's the main thing about Jay that's important in here. It's not just about Jey Uso and his championship run. If Jey Uso's run was a success, then it's going to entice WWE with taking more chances on people who are just as popular, if not more so, than Jey Uso. Like, WWE is still going to control who's going to be on top. They're going to control who's going to be in the world championship scene. But to give Jay just like a run, saying, you know what, you earned it, you deserve it, let's see what you do with it, and just kind of like give him a couple days. You know, it didn't need to be, in my opinion, didn't need to be like 100, 200, 300 days. I thought his run was fine. You know, they crammed a lot of it in. And you could see within Triple H's booking, like, the differences on how he books champions. Like, Io Sky, Cody Rhodes, Roman, Rhea Ripley, like, Liv Morgan. When they were all top champions, their defenses were few and far between, but Jay was still a workhorse as champion. Like, it didn't seem like Jay missed a beat, so he was still, like, breeding on that workhorse kind of style as champion. And I don't think a lot of people will notice it until enough time passes on. And I feel like Jay will get his flowers later down the line when he's not the center of attention or center focus, which is, I think, the pattern that happens when something is unpopular, where it's like people who have new nostalgic feelings for things they were kids. Like, kids nowadays, when they grow up, they're gonna be like, oh man, wrestling's cool. But man, when Jey Uso came out, like, and everybody was yeeting in the crowd, yeah, like, that was cool. That was epic. And Jay, I feel like, again, can come back to that world championship scene and succeed in that position. And a lot of people would either discredit it or really love that, depending on if you like Jay as a babyface, if you like him as a heel, if you like him as a performer, if you don't like him as a performer. Like, I do believe he can be in that fixture of top guys that we have right now. And we're at a point where a lot of people are not just popular, but they're over too. Like, people are getting superstar reactions, and that just wasn't the case. And the example I always put in is like how people got more and more over. I believe the first week that Triple H took over, it was like a United States Championship tournament, like they had triple threats, and which was kind of different at the time because you didn't really see many triple threats back then. And Chad Gable comes out, and he's coming out to like no reaction. And now you have Chad Gable come out, and he has a huge reaction, you know, because now he's getting featured time. Now, the character choice that people might associate Chad Gable with currently might not be their preference of a character they want Chad Gable to portray. However, it just goes to show that if you're portrayed a certain way, at least consistently, you're going to gain popularity with the fans. And sometimes, in the case of Jay, where it's not exactly telling a story of him being a solo star, the fans who are supporting and behind him just kind of like gravitate to him, because I feel like Jay, more than almost anybody in WWE, has shown multiple emotions during the Bloodline storyline, has excelled in acting during the Bloodline story. And he hasn't done that within his singles run, in my opinion, at least, because it's almost like his story was told when he left the Bloodline. It's almost like, all right, now's the time he could have fun because he's not dragged down by the family drama, which I think a lot of people can relate to. And a lot of people can relate to, you know, whether it's friends or family, like just being in a situation you just want to get out of. So you go to a different setting and all of a sudden you're thriving right now. And that's what kind of Jay embodied for a lot of people. And I think he's a very important figure that people are going to look back on and be content that Jay got the opportunity to win the Rumble, to be world champion. Jay's run was the perfect transitional champion run. And I think the word transitional might offend a lot of people who are fans of Jay. However, there are some championship runs that are transitional that meant a lot to people. Like Jeff Hardy's run, like I mentioned, his runs were not very long. Mankind, Mick Foley, his runs weren't really long. Even people like John Cena, Randy Orton, Edge, they all had transitional runs. Some lasted a couple weeks, not even a month. I think Randy's first world title run only lasted 28 days. John Cena, one of his runs only lasted like 10 or 5 minutes. Edge, his first run, I think, was 21 days, if I can remember correctly. I know, like, he lost it, he won it in January, he lost it in January of 2006. But I don't see, like, him being a transitional champion as a negative. If anything, he has the weight of being, oh, he's the former world champion trying to get back his gold, which is another story you can tell and opens up more story avenues. How's Sammy going to feel that Jay's trying to go for the world championship again after being world champion? There is a lot of story direction they can do with Jay as a former world champion. So I'm not asking, Jay's run to be like 1,500 days or something like that. Could it be possible he can have a longer run down the line? Sure, absolutely. We've seen it before. As long as the story and Jay continues to maintain his popularity and his body holds up, I think there's a very good chance we see Jey Uso as world champion again, and hopefully we have a lot more dynamic stories in store for him, because I think we just kind of scratched the surface of Jey Uso as a world champion / main event singles world champion competitor. And it's going to culminate to a point later on this year where I think we're going to see him and Sammy kind of butt heads, because both their goals are now similar, where Sammy could see, like, Jay's trying to get the championship again, and then he's like, wait, it's my turn. But Jay's like, again, it's one of those things where conflict breeds into storytelling. And with the friendships and the relationships we've seen with Jay have with Cody, with Sammy, we're going to see that come more and more to a head. And I think that's the best direction for Jay to go, is to have these friendships and relationships. And that's a good thing about this era of creative, is you could see how people are connected. While as before, you see John Cena, you see Randy Orton, you see Punk, and those are the only ones that probably have connections. Even with Randy, there was like a point in time where there was like 10 years where it was just kind of just being Randy. He didn't really need to do anything. But now you have people who are interconnected with each other on the top of the card to the middle of the card, where before it wasn't much of the case like that. So I'm very interested to see what happens with Jay. There is a possibility, I think, that he teams back up with Jimmy, and then we have them versus possibly the New Day or the Wyatts or anything like that. And I do think it's a good idea for them to be a team. I think there's a lot more money to be made with them individually, at least try them individually. I know people want Jimmy to get a chance because I think they see him as the more in-ring worthy brother of the two. But again, I don't book the company. Not my company, not my problem. But that's going to do it for me about Jey Uso's championship run. Overall, I thought it was a very big success, whether it was monetarily, whether it was quality within the ring, at least for the time he was champion. I wasn't offended that his reign ended. It's exactly what it needed to be. The story was told. Could have gone longer. Absolutely, it could have gone longer. But that just makes people clamor for it more if they're fans of Jey Uso. And if he's not champion now, then people who don't like Jey Uso could be like, oh, okay, he's not champion now. So it wasn't as bad as they thought it was. You got to admit that. It's like, oh, this wasn't the worst reign of all time. And if you do, you're just being disingenuous, in my opinion. Because there were a ton of worse world championship runs that I can think of offhand. Like, you have, like, Rey Mysterio when he first won it. Actually, possibly all of Rey Mysterio's runs as world champion. None of the fault of Rey Mysterio, just the stories weren't there. CM Punk's first run as world champion, I don't think was treated well. Jinder Mahal as world champion. JBL's was long. I remember watching as a kid. JBL's was long, and like, I'm not sure how people feel about JBL's champion, but he was like one of the main bad guys when I was growing up. But yeah, overall, I think Jay's, again, his run was fine. I think he represented himself well as champion. I think people, at least within the audience at the shows, accepted him as world champion. And we're going to see where he goes on from there. But again, my name is Richie Mars, at Retold Richie Mars on Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube. You could listen to this on Spotify and Apple Podcast and YouTube weekly. So get your fill on that every Tuesday. TTFN, ta-ta for now, and I will see you next time.